Takes a couple of seconds. I feel like after like 35 episodes of this show, we're starting to handle the tech gremlins very effectively and
You're
being
getting
able
there.
to run really smoothly. All right, I think we're good to go. Welcome everybody to the Master Your Exit live show powered by The Big Exit. I'm Lynn, and together with Graham, will be your host for today. And on this Master Your Exit show, we bring practical insights, expert interviews, and tools to help small business owners like you prepare for your big exit. Now, this live show airs every Tuesday at 7 a.m. in Los Angeles, 10 a.m. in New York, or if you're across on the other side, 3 p.m. in London. And we keep each episode short and simple for about 30 minutes maximum. Now, if you're tuning in live on YouTube or on our LinkedIn channel, that's really cool. If you joined us live here in the studio, that's really awesome too. You can put your questions in the chat bot and we'll be answering them during this episode. And if you're catching this episode later, which is also possible because we have all of the episodes on our website, go to thebigexit.co. That's really cool as well. If you're watching this in a delayed version on our website or also maybe on your favorite podcast platform, because we have some cool stuff over there as well. That was all about the intro. Graham, I was mentioning to you before that I was running a live webinar last week for the team, or not the team, but the members of the Exit Planning Institute in the
Mm.
US, which is a really cool community of people who are supporting business owners in planning and exiting their business and planning for that exit. There were more than 500 people who signed up for this webinar, which I thought was just really cool. And it was probably due to the topic that I decided to talk about, which apparently was like hitting the mark. Is that how you say it? Because we talked about how to emotionally prepare business owners for their exit, which is a topic I love talking about. It's a topic that
Mm.
not a lot of people seem to be talking about, but I don't know if you've seen this. I've put like a rough number on it, but I think about three quarters, 70% of like delays, stalling, deals falling through even happen, not so much due to technical stuff during this exit planning or exiting journey, but emotional reasons. Um, I'm wondering about you if, I mean, it was a rough number that I shared because I don't think there's any statistics around it. But have you also seen deals falling through, worst case scenario, or getting delayed
Mm.
or ending up at lower valuations because of something related, emotional, that is happening at the seller's side?
Absolutely. I think it isn't spoken about nearly enough. At the end of the day, the numbers, you can prepare all of that sort of stuff. It's quite mechanical in some ways, getting your business ready, documenting processes, driving profitability, all those sorts of things. That's a lot of fine tuning, but I think people don't talk about the emotional aspect. And it varies depending on the type and size of the business, but we see a lot of that. Again, in terms of putting a number on that, I would say it's probably north of 50%, where owners are actually not necessarily ready. I think they fall in love with the idea of selling their business, and not what that actually means for them. So I think it's certainly super, super, super important to prepare well in advance of even contemplating a sale, if you have the chance. And then you do get owners as well who get approached out of the blue. And we have a number of these in the last year where they get a trade buyer or strategic buyer approach them, and suddenly oh, we want to sell. They get caught up in it, and they too haven't processed it. They kind of get into the hype mode of, oh, somebody's interested in me. I should sell. And I've seen the problem. If you're not emotionally ready, it goes through, and if the deal fails or at the 11th hour something happens, it just breaks trust. And emotional readiness is really, really tough. You can fix a lot of the other things in a business. You can pass due diligence, but the emotional piece is probably, together with owner dependence, probably one of the biggest reasons for deals failing or not getting the right price.
And here's the thing, because you've mentioned like there's a lot of stuff that you can prepare in terms of like technical or mechanical things, but you can't really prepare for the emotional roller coaster. And parts of that is true. And parts of that is also like, yes, you can also emotionally prepare yourself for an exit. I think because we haven't seen a lot of tools, a lot of coaching, a lot of support in that sense. I think we tend to believe it's something like we just have to plow through and deal with it as
Yeah.
it comes along, and it just gets really murky and messy and all of these things. On the other hand, I do believe there is a process that can be kind of followed almost as mechanical or technical as everything else in preparing yourself if you are an owner or helping your clients if you're an exit advisor on that journey towards more emotional readiness, and it's talking and working through quite a lot of things. And I mean, one of the things that I talked about in the webinar was two things I talked about, and I want to share them on the show today as well. One
Mhm.
was the most common emotional barriers that we get to see. There's like five of them. There's more, there's hundreds of them, but there are a few
Mhm.
that are recurring. And based on what the feedback was from the audience that was on the API webinar, a lot of that for them was like, yes, we recognize these things, these are familiar. So I wanted to go through, all right, on this show as well, through like five emotional barriers, but also the behavior that then pops up when these barriers are there, because we don't always know these barriers. The owner might not know, they might be subconsciously playing around
Mhm.
and they don't even realize it themselves, but it shows up in certain behavior. And it's the behavior that we can recognize, and that
Mhm.
can be an indicator for there might be something else going on here than just, I don't know how to do it, or something along those lines, you know? And I
Mhm.
wanted to talk a little bit about the five emotional barriers first, and maybe there's some examples that you want to share, or like clients that you've
Yeah.
worked with where you're like, hey, yeah, I've seen this, and this is what happened, and like, it wasn't a good thing that happened. Um, I think the first emotional barrier I want to talk about is the identity attachment. It's like, who am I when I sell? What
Mhm.
is left of me? Because I have always identified myself as this, as a business owner, maybe as a successful business owner. It's how I introduce myself. It's how I talk to people about the stuff that I want to talk about. There's this huge piece of like, but if I'm selling the business, I'm not the owner anymore, then what am I? It's kind of almost like they feel, because the identity is so attached with the business, that they feel like they're erasing, like kind of erasing themselves totally
Mhm.
from the planet by selling this business. I think this is a huge piece of something an owner needs to work through when they're in the process of selling, because if that barrier pops up, it can stall everything.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I just want to touch on two things. I'll get to that point right now. Is you just made a point, and I just want to highlight that distinction. It's you can prepare emotionally, but I think the whole sort of industry is not really geared towards doing that. Most of the participants and the advisors are lawyers, accountants, valuation specialists, all the technical stuff. And I think that's why there's not, there's so few people focusing on it. But I'll park that point. I think that the point around that wrapping up your identity in the business, it's absolutely true. I mean, we see it a lot more with, let's call it, long-standing business owners, family business, people who've been in the business for 20, 30, 40 years. Okay. That's all they know. That's what they do. The business consumes it.
It's who they
We do,
are.
yeah, exactly. It defines who they are. And then, yeah, I've seen the effects of not thinking that through. The sale goes through even. And 6 months later, after, traveling to every country that they want to go to and playing as many rounds of golf or going to the spa, I'm not
Mm.
gender stereotyping here, whatever the case might be, then it's suddenly, what do I do next? What do I do with my time? Whether that's a big exit or a small exit. I've heard somebody refer to this as the second mountain. The first mountain is selling your business, then it's and I'm stealing the phrase. It was in a webinar that I attended before. Like, what is that second mountain? To use an analogy there, more people, they become so hung up, on their business being them, they don't know what to do afterwards. And that's a long process. It's very hard to actually find that afterwards. You need to start thinking about that beforehand.
Yeah. And I think you're touching on two actually emotional barriers. One is I'm so attached as in my identity to this business that I don't know who I am without the business. And I
Yeah.
fear losing my status. I fear losing, all the things that go with being a business owner. There's that piece. And I think the second emotional barrier, as you were saying rightly as well, is this fear of what's next. I don't know what's next once I sell this business. I don't know what I'm going to do besides, I'll buy a yacht and I go sail around the Caribbean or something cliche like that. But
Mhm.
really thinking about how am I going to feel purposeful? How am I going to feel content? How am I going to feel useful? How am I going to get that adrenaline kick that sometimes I'm getting from
Mhm.
being in business as well? So that fear of what's next and this huge void that is there, like if you can't create a vision for yourself, like the true vision for you, not what everybody else is saying you should be doing, but something you really want to do, ideally together, with friends or your loved ones or your children or whoever.
Mhm.
I think that's a second emotional barrier that can really have business owners push in the brakes in
Yeah.
making a deal actually happen because they have no clue what they're going to do next. They haven't thought about it. They don't want to think about it. And to move into the third barrier,
Can
they
I just
also
jump in
don't
there
talk with.
quickly? And sorry
Go
to
ahead.
interrupt you, Lynn. And I think some people who have thought about next, and I'll use an example that you're probably well aware of, is a famous example. I'll use someone like Richard Branson, okay, who has been through multiple exits, billionaire, all of that sort of stuff. And one of the things he does is he runs retreats for entrepreneurs at Necker Island. People think, oh, he's how old's Richard now? He must be in his mid 70s.
75. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He carries on like a 50-year-old or 45-year-old in terms of playing.
I mean, when
But
he
but
goes hiking and cycling on Necker, like there is no way I can follow this guy. Like he's just
yeah,
so fit. I can't,
but
like, whenever I play tennis with him, I lose. I'm also bad at playing tennis, but I mean, in all fairness, the guy is just super fit. Like, it's ridiculous. Anyway, sorry.
yeah, but the point is he's got purpose and he knows what's next. And it might not
Yeah.
be running his businesses anymore, but it's giving back and it's helping others. And even while you're playing tennis with him on the island, he's coaching and sharing and imparting knowledge. So I think that's a good example of somebody who has managed to figure out what's next. So yeah.
100%. Great example. Absolutely. And I think it ties beautifully in the third barrier that I've never really heard anybody talking about this, but it's a misalignment with your spouse, your partner,
Mhm.
your children, or the ones who are closest to you. I recently heard about a story about a woman business owner who was like stalling and stalling the conversation of an exit, although the timing was really right. And she did feel like it was a good move to make.
Mhm.
Yet it took her so long to actually realize that she wasn't really keen on the idea of being at home every single day whilst being
Mhm.
out in the office, 5, 6,
Mhm.
7 days a week, 10 hours a day, something like that. And it took her a little while to even realize that for herself, but like this
Mhm.
misalignment of like, oh, now I need to be home with this person I hardly talked to in the last
Mhm.
25 years.
Mhm.
And I actually don't really know what I have to say or how we're going to sometimes even pick up
Mhm.
the pieces of what is left of a relationship that has struggled through business life of one of the two partners, So I don't know if you've seen anything like that. This is a
Yeah, I mean,
story I recently heard, and it really broke my heart because there's so
mm,
much to that story.
yeah, I think that's that alignment with your significant other or spouse, whatever, is so important. And I read something on LinkedIn the other day. It was a similar story. It wasn't an entrepreneur, but it was somebody who was a senior executive in a bank, and they'd worked there for 40 years, and they were used to making big calls and big decisions and all of those sorts of things. And he said, 3 months after retirement, it could be a male, female, it doesn't really matter. He was kind of resigned to being a domestic helper all day, doing dishes, cleaning up, and yeah, they'd never had that discussion. Okay, what does it mean? Like maybe when they were younger as a couple, they had dreams of traveling the world and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, it is so important. And communicating that with your spouse or significant other, beforehand is important, because even if there wasn't conflict before, it can create conflict, because one party might think, cool, I'm going to have my spouse, home all the time, we're going to do cool stuff, and the other party might not be aligned. So those conversations are hard conversations, but they need to be had.
100% so true. Um, just thinking about, because we spoke about the identity attachment, the fear of what's next and not really knowing what's next, the fear
Yeah.
of having to kind of rekindle with your family life, your spouse, your partner, not really sure how this new life is going to look like as a couple or as a family or as a little community there. I think another big thing that can totally be an emotional blockage, although we would never call it an emotional blockage because it's not how we handle it in general as exit planners, advisors, consultants, is fantasy valuations. We address them with this is what your business is worth because of this number here and that benchmark there and this multiple here, and we do all these calculations and a number pops up and then boom, it's like this is how much your business is worth,
Mm.
which is, to be fair, in 95% of the cases not the number that the owner thinks the business is worth, and
Yeah.
likely it's lower, not higher. Sometimes it's higher, but most of the time it's lower. And we tend to advise them by giving even more technical explanations of why it is what it is. And maybe if the market's a little bit better, then you would get a higher valuation and all of these things. But what we often not address is this sense of the owner thinking probably, has it all been worth it?
Mhm.
I worked my off for 20, 30 years. I wasn't there when my kid got born. I wasn't there when, like these major things happened in my life. I wasn't at the theater performance of my little girl, and I wasn't there when this happened, and all those sleepless nights and all those weekends away from home and all these, was it all worth it? And that's, I think,
Mhm.
one of the things that we forget when we talk about valuations and like coming to terms
Mhm.
with a certain valuation, because that's what I think the fear that's inside the owner, the emotional part of it is like, I have sacrificed so much,
Mhm.
not always, but most of the time, I've sacrificed so much for
Mhm.
this.
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting conundrum, and I want to touch on a couple of a few things there actually. One is human nature. We tend to aim towards a goal, okay, and sometimes that sale happens even if you get the valuation. Sell for $100 million at 65, 70 years old. You know, how in the world are you going to spend $100 million in the last sort of 10 or 15 years of your life? Okay, so sometimes there's actually a reality, and there's just this number. It becomes an ego thing around that. The second is, I think I always advise people when they're building, yes, you need to make sacrifices, but when you're building a business and it's providing and it's creating cash flow and all that, it's sustaining a lifestyle. So it sounds silly, but don't miss your kid's valedictory service. Don't miss going to the game. Do all of that. If you build the business in such a way that it's not dependent on you, you can do all those things. Say for the first year or two or three, think with that mindset. You think, how do I make this business into such a that helps. So people I've seen who built businesses in that way, less of an issue in terms of that. And then the third one I often see is the valuation is sometimes dependent on what's called an earnout. Okay, obviously it's forward looking, so they sell out to private equity for argument's sake, and private equity wants their pound of flesh. So like 30 million cash up front, and if you want to hit the 100 million, you've got to stick it out for 3 years, and then you've got to hit these crazy targets, and you can't make decisions, and you can't do all of those things. That's one of the other emotional things linked to valuation. Now suddenly you've used to be running your business, and now you need permission from a committee to write a check for $5,000. Okay, so there's a bunch tied up into that statement around valuation. Yeah, just a couple of perspectives from my side on that.
Yeah, 100%. You're so right. There's just so much that goes into that and that emotional work that, you kind of have to do if you want to guide your clients, if you are in the space of, working with business owners and like guiding them through that process of like, what does that mean, evaluation, but what does that also mean or not mean about you, about your
Yeah,
future, about who you are, what you deserve, the sacrifices you've made, and all of these things. So thank you so
yeah.
much for adding that. And I think the fifth one, and then we're gonna slowly wrap it up because we've been chatting away for about 20 minutes already about it. I think the fifth one is some form of freezing. And I think you've seen this many times before. I see it as well with people who are like, they're on a sales call. They want to understand better what it means to sell their business and preparing for a sale and
Mm.
maximizing value and stuff like that. And then they don't do anything. They
Mm.
don't commit to anything. And I mean, it's obviously frustrating when you're wishing and hoping that you can help somebody along the way. Um, but I also came to understand that sometimes they don't do anything because it makes it feel really real. And the
Mm.
exit becomes real. They're starting to commit and make these like micro commitments towards, and a micro commitment could be, I'm gonna go to Graham and ask him to do like a basic free valuation of my business, just
Mm.
so I have an idea what it's worth. That's like a micro commitment, but every
Yeah.
one of these like micro commitments, a lot of owners can like totally freeze there and not decide to do
Mm.
anything because it just becomes real. And then they're like, no, I have
I
a
mean,
client like that. Like every time, I feel she could be ready to make the next step. It's like she's immediately backtracking. And there's all these excuses that pop up to not take that next step because it's just that fear of like it becomes
yeah, I've
really,
seen that,
really
and I've seen
real.
that run. I've seen that run through right to pre-close. I mean, just this year I was working on a deal with that. It was a father and son business. The father was in his 60s, the son was 40. They had a deal. It was an international buyer. They had gone through due diligence. The buyer funded everything. I mean, they had spent $30,000-$40,000 on the due diligence. They had signed a binding offer. They had met the sellers every request around valuation. They bumped their price by 10%. And literally the day before closing, the sellers just said, "We're not doing it anymore." It was that crazy. They paid the break fees. They did all of that sort of stuff. I mean, this was a 6 to 9 month sale process. And it was precisely that. They actually just weren't ready to commit,
Yeah.
and that's quite heartbreaking, and for the buyer as well, because they put a lot of time and effort into it.
100%, yeah. And I mean, this is just such divine timing that you're raising this particular thing because remember in the beginning of the show, I was saying like we often
Mm.
don't know those barriers are there, but they will pop up in certain behavior.
Some
And it's
point.
the behavior that we see. And one of the
Yeah.
behaviors is backing out at any stage of the process, the LOI
Yeah.
stage, due diligence stage, just before wiring the money, like at any point of the stage, backing out of it, like what seems for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a worst case scenario, right? Like having that happen. It could also be like this conversation of, I need more time. I'm not ready
Mhm.
yet. I'll do it in 2 or 3 years' time. That whole behavior of like just procrastination, 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 or defensiveness.
Yeah.
My business is great. It's the best business in the world. It doesn't depend on me. I hardly go to the office, yet you know it's not true because they're there every single
They're there
day
all the
and
time.
can't take a week off, you know, but just being
Yeah.
really defensive about, you know, the business and this process and all of the things. So when you see that happening in conversations, that there's something else
Yeah.
going on, that they feel like they need to kind of slow things down a little bit, or like over controlling, over managing, micromanaging, really putting their nose in every single thing that you're saying as an advisor, scrutinizing you, like all of these things. Just I see this behavior, and we try to often manage it a little bit in like a technical reasoning, logical kind of way. Yet I think if we can address it on the more emotional side of things, you'll probably get breakthroughs quicker. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and avoid having deals delay or stall or even just fall through, basically. So I feel like I want to talk about this a little bit more in some of the next couple of shows that we have until the end of this year. But for now, I think we're kind of running out of time.
I think what we've demonstrated is just how much more attention this topic needs. I mean, it's just each of these five barriers and the behaviors and that. I mean, we can literally spend an hour on each of those. So I think we've got our content plan for the next couple of months
For the
lined up.
next couple of weeks at least, for sure. Absolutely. So let's wrap up the show for today. So this is a wrap for this week's episode of the Master Your Exit live show. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you're leaving with some valuable insights to help you prepare for your big exit, or if you're an exit advisor, to help your clients prepare for their big exit. Now, remember, you can catch this episode or any of the other episodes on our website, thebigexit.co/master your exit shows, with little dashes in every single word, in between every single word, or listen to the audio version on your favorite podcast platform. Now, we also love to hear from you. Send in your exit related questions for next week's show via the website as well, where you can sign up, leave your questions, and then we can answer them in one of the next future episodes. So we'll be back next Tuesday at 7 a.m. Los Angeles time, 10 a.m. New York time, or 3 p.m. London time, with more tips, expert interviews, and tools to help you master your exit. Until then, keep building, keep preparing, and we'll see you next week.